The small coastal town of Pine Harbor had always been the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. That's why Eliza Chen's disappearance hit so hard. One day she was there, a respected trauma nurse at the local hospital, a friendly face at the weekend farmer's market, a devoted daughter who called her parents every Sunday without fail, and the next day, she was simply gone. It happened on a Tuesday in late October, the kind of autumn evening when the air turns crisp and the sky darkens early. Eliza had just finished her 12-hour shift at Pine Harbor Memorial. Security cameras showed her walking to her car at 7:42 p.m., her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, hospital badge still clipped to her scrubs. She drove out of the parking lot at 7:46 p.m., and then nothing. When Eliza didn't show up for her shift the next morning, her colleague Renee tried calling her cell phone. No answer. After 3 attempts, Renee called their supervisor. It wasn't like Eliza to be late, much less to miss work entirely without notice. She was the reliable one, the nurse who picked up extra shifts when others called out sick, the one who remembered every patient's name and history. By noon, the hospital had contacted the police. By evening, Eliza's apartment door was being opened with a spare key kept by the building manager. Inside, everything looked normal, eerily normal. A cutting board on the kitchen counter held half a chopped onion, starting to brown at the edges. A pan sat on the stove, a thin layer of olive oil coating its surface. The refrigerator hummed quietly, stocked with fresh groceries purchased just days before. Her wallet lay on the entryway table, driver's license and credit cards neatly arranged inside. Her phone charger was plugged into the wall beside her bed, but her phone was missing. "It looks like she started making dinner and then just vanished," said Officer Powell, the first responder on the scene. Eliza's brother, Thomas, arrived from the next town over within the hour, his face tight with worry. "This isn't like her," he kept saying, pacing the small living room. "Something's wrong. She wouldn't just leave." The initial investigation moved quickly. The police checked traffic cameras that showed Eliza's blue Honda Civic turning onto Elm Street at 7:52 p.m. The next camera, positioned at the corner of Elm and Main, should have caught her passing through 4 minutes later. But there was no sign of her car. Her vehicle was discovered the next morning in the parking lot of a trailhead leading into Riverwood Nature Preserve, a sprawling woodland area on the edge of town. The car was locked, her hospital badge and a half-empty water bottle inside. No signs of struggle, no blood. No fingerprints except her own. Search parties formed immediately. Volunteers from town joined police officers and K-9 units to comb through the dense woods. They called her name until their voices grew hoarse. The dogs tracked her scent from the car to the beginning of the trail, and then lost it completely. It's as if she walked a few feet into the woods and then disappeared into thin air, explained the K-9 handler, confusion evident in his voice. Days passed. The search expanded. Helicopters with thermal imaging swept the forest. Divers checked the deep parts of the river that cut through the preserve. Nothing. The local newspaper ran her story on the front page for a week straight. Missing Nurse 27 vanishes without a trace. Her photo, warm brown eyes, slight smile, dark hair framing an oval face, became familiar to everyone in town. Flyers with her image appeared on every telephone pole, bulletin board, and shop window. Theories began to circulate. Some believed she had been taken, abducted from the trail by some passing stranger. Others whispered about voluntary disappearance. Had Eliza been hiding something? Was there a secret side to the quiet, dependable nurse? Absolutely not, Thomas insisted during the community meeting held in the high school gymnasium 2 weeks after his sister vanished. Eliza loved her life here. She loved her job. She wouldn't just walk away from everything. But as the investigation deepened, puzzling details emerged. Eliza had withdrawn small amounts of cash, never more than a few $100s from her bank account over the past year, totaling nearly $5,000. Her internet search history showed research on countries with no extradition treaties with the United States. She had applied for a passport 6 months before her disappearance, though no border crossings under her name had been recorded since then. "We have to consider the possibility that Eliza planned this," Detective Rivera said gently during her third interview with Thomas. "These withdrawals, these searches, they suggest preparation." Thomas shook his head vigorously. "That's not possible. We talked almost every day. She would have told me if something was wrong, if she was planning to leave. Sometimes the people closest to us keep the biggest secrets." Rivera replied, sliding a folder across the table. Does this look familiar to you? Inside was a photograph of a small notebook found hidden beneath the lining of Eliza's dresser drawer. Its pages contained what appeared to be a coded journal, lines of numbers and letters that made no immediate sense. Thomas stared at it, bewildered. I've never seen this before. What does it mean? We don't know yet. Our analysts are working on it. As 1 month became 2, then 3, the case grew colder. The newspaper stories moved from the front page to the back. The search parties dwindled until only Thomas and a handful of dedicated friends continued to comb the woods on weekends. Eliza's parents, who had moved to Arizona years before for her father's health, aged visibly during their stay in Pine Harbor. After 6 weeks, they returned home, leaving Thomas to manage the ongoing search. We can't give up, Thomas told them at the airport. She's out there somewhere. I know it. His mother squeezed his hand, her eyes red-rimmed from weeks of crying. Call us the moment you hear anything. Anything at all. Winter settled over Pine Harbor. Snow blanketed the trails where searchers had once called Eliza's name. Her apartment was eventually cleared out, her belongings packed into boxes that Thomas stored in his garage. The hospital held a memorial service, though they were careful to call it a celebration of service rather than a funeral. No one was ready to declare Eliza dead, not officially, but life had to move forward. Only Thomas remained steadfast. He converted his spare bedroom into what his girlfriend began calling the investigation room. Maps covered one wall, red pins marking possible sightings of women resembling Eliza across the country. Timelines stretched across another wall, detailing her last known movements and the strange financial transactions discovered after her disappearance. The coded notebook became his obsession. He spent hours each night working through possible ciphers, convinced that if he could crack the code, he would understand what had happened to his sister. Detective Rivera continued to check in, though her visits became less frequent as new cases demanded her attention. Sometimes we never get answers, she told him during one such visit 6 months after Eliza disappeared. Sometimes people just go. Not Eliza, Thomas insisted, showing Rivera his latest attempt to decode the notebook. She wouldn't do this to us. To me. As the 1-year mark of Eliza's disappearance approached, the case received a brief resurgence of media attention. A true crime podcast dedicated an episode to her story, featuring interviews with Thomas and several of Eliza's co-workers. She was the most compassionate nurse I've ever worked with, said Dr. Park, the emergency room director. After difficult cases, the ones we couldn't save, she would take it harder than anyone. I once found her crying in the supply closet after we lost a child from a car accident, but she always came back the next day ready to try again. That's who she was. The podcast generated a handful of tips, all leading nowhere. A waitress in Idaho thought she'd served Eliza breakfast. A gas station attendant in New Mexico reported seeing someone with her build and coloring. Each time, Thomas's hopes soared, only to crash when the leads proved false. 2 years passed. Then 3. Thomas got married in a small ceremony that felt incomplete without his sister as bridesmaid. His first child was born, a daughter he named after Eliza's middle name, hoping that somehow his sister would know, would feel the connection across whatever distance separated them. The investigation room remained, though he visited it less frequently now. The police officially classified Eliza's case as cold. Her dental records and DNA remained in the system, but active searching had long since ceased, and then, 5 years after she vanished without a trace, Thomas received an email from an address he didn't recognize. No subject line, no message, just an attachment, a photograph that would change everything. The image was grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a zoom lens. It showed a makeshift medical tent, the kind set up in disaster zones. In the foreground, partially turned away from the camera, stood a woman tending to a wounded child. Her face wasn't clearly visible, but her posture, the set of her shoulders, the way she tilted her head as she worked, Thomas knew instantly it was Eliza. The metadata embedded in the photo placed it in Karayev, a remote region torn apart by civil war. A place so dangerous that most international aid organizations had pulled out years ago, a place that no one in their right mind would voluntarily enter. And, yet there she was, his missing sister, alive and in the heart of a war zone. No one else would touch. Thomas stared at the photo until his eyes burned. His hands trembled as he zoomed in, trying to see more of his sister's face. The image quality degraded with each enlargement, but he didn't need perfect clarity. He knew it was Eliza. The way she leaned toward the patient, her characteristic focus, the slight tilt of her head. These were mannerisms as familiar to him as his own reflection. The email had come from an address that looked like random characters, likely a temporary account. No message accompanied the photo, just a file name. Karayev Hospital 415 JPG, and metadata showing it had been taken just 2 months ago. After 5 years of dead ends and false hopes, Thomas felt something new stirring in his chest. Not just hope, certainty. He called Detective Rivera immediately, though she had retired from the force a year earlier. "I found her," he said the moment she answered, his voice cracking. "Eliza is alive." There was a long pause on the line. "Thomas," Rivera said gently, "we've been through this before. Not like this. I have a photo, recent, she's in Karayev." "The Warzone?" "Thomas, that doesn't make any sense. Why would Eliza be in one of the most dangerous places on Earth?" "I don't know yet. But it's her." "I know it's her." Rivera agreed to come over the next day. When she arrived, Thomas had already printed the photo and pinned it to his investigation wall. He had spent the night researching Karayev, a disputed territory caught in a brutal civil war that had raged for nearly a decade. Most international aid organizations had pulled out years ago due to the extreme danger to their personnel. "Even if this is Eliza," Rivera said, studying the grainy image, "how would she get there? Why would she go? And who sent you this photo?" Good questions. Questions that kept Thomas awake for the next 3 nights as he dug deeper into his sister's life, looking for anything he might have missed. He started with her old laptop, which had been returned to the family after the initial investigation. The police had already examined it thoroughly, finding nothing suspicious beyond those few searches about countries with no extradition treaties. Thomas wasn't a tech expert, but he had learned a few things over 5 years of amateur investigating. He knew about hidden folders and encrypted files. He ran recovery software looking for deleted data. Most of it was mundane. Old college papers, photos from hospital staff parties, recipes she had saved. And then he found it. A folder that hadn't been uncovered during the original investigation. It contained dozens of articles about global humanitarian crises, email exchanges with doctors working for various relief organizations, and applications for volunteer positions with groups operating in conflict zones. She was planning to leave, Thomas realized, but not the way everyone thought. Further digging revealed that Eliza had been taking online courses in emergency field medicine, tropical disease management, and conversational Arabic and Russian, languages spoken in regions experiencing severe humanitarian crises. Thomas brought his findings to Rivera. She wasn't running away from something. She was running toward something. Rivera frowned, paging through his printed evidence. But why the secrecy? Why make everyone think she was dead or kidnapped? The answer came from an unexpected source. Chen Li, Eliza's mother, had kept all her daughter's childhood journals stored in the attic of their Arizona home. When Thomas asked her to send them, she shipped a box containing not just the diaries but all of Eliza's personal effects that they had taken after the disappearance. Among them was a small, leather-bound journal Thomas had never seen before, tucked inside the lining of an old purse. Unlike her childhood diaries with their bright covers and tiny locks, this one was worn, the pages filled with tight, cramped writing. The entries dated back to Eliza's college years, when she had volunteered during her summer break with a refugee relief program in Turkey. The early pages described her excitement, her sense of purpose. Then came an entry from August 17th, 7 years before her disappearance. The family from Aleppo died today, all of them. The father, the mother, their 3 children. The youngest was only 4. I had promised them they would be safe here. I had promised they would receive medical care. But the antibiotics never came. The infection spread too quickly. I watched the light go out of that little girl's eyes while her mother screamed. What good is all my training if I can't save one family? What good is a system that lets people die over paperwork and politics? Thomas read the entire journal in one sitting, watching his sister's transformation through her own words. The idealistic nursing student became a woman haunted by what she had witnessed and by what she felt was her failure to help. Subsequent Entries detailed her growing frustration with traditional aid organizations. She wrote about bureaucratic barriers that prevented timely assistance, about political considerations that determined which crises received attention and which were ignored. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before her disappearance. "I've made my decision. Dr. Nowak says they can get me into Karayev through the northern border. The underground medics are the only group still working in the eastern territories. No oversight, no restrictions, no waiting for permissions that never come. Just doctors and nurses going where they're needed most. This is what I was meant to do. But it means cutting all ties. They've been clear about that. It's too dangerous otherwise, for me and for everyone I love. God forgive me for what I'm about to put my family through. I hope someday they'll understand." Thomas sat on the floor of his study, surrounded by pieces of his sister's hidden life, and finally understood. Eliza hadn't been abducted. She hadn't run away from some unknown threat. She had made a conscious choice to disappear so she could work in places too dangerous for conventional aid. The coded journal suddenly made sense too. It was likely a medical log, keeping track of patients and treatments in a way that wouldn't endanger them if it fell into the wrong hands. "She's a ghost medic," Rivera said when Thomas shared his discovery. It wasn't an official term, but over the years, rumors had circulated about healthcare workers who operated off the grid in conflict zones, providing care to civilians caught in crossfires where official organizations couldn't or wouldn't go. "These people basically erase their former lives," Rivera explained. "No digital footprint, no official records. They work through underground networks. Most governments deny they exist because acknowledging them would mean admitting that official aid channels are inadequate." Thomas spent the next week reaching out to journalists who covered international conflicts, humanitarian workers, anyone who might have connections to these underground networks. Most ignored his inquiries. Some responded with polite confusion. A few explicitly warned him to drop his search. "These networks survive on absolute secrecy," wrote one war correspondent. "If your sister really is working with them, exposing her identity could get her killed." But Thomas couldn't just let it go. Not now that he knew Eliza was alive. He needed to understand why she had chosen this path, why she had put her family through years of grief and uncertainty. His breakthrough came through a photographer named Anton, who had documented the Karayev conflict for an international news agency. Anton didn't confirm or deny knowing Eliza specifically, but he agreed to meet Thomas in a neighboring country that served as a staging ground for journalists and aid workers entering the conflict zone. "I can't promise anything," Anton said during their video call, "but bring proof she's your sister. And come alone." Thomas took a leave of absence from his job, told his wife he'd be gone for 2 weeks on a lead about Eliza, and booked a flight. He carried only a small backpack containing clothes, their childhood photos, and DNA test results proving their relationship. The journey took 3 days, a commercial flight to Istanbul, then a smaller plane to a regional airport, and finally a long drive in Anton's dusty Jeep toward the border of Karayev. "The fighting has shifted to the southern provinces," Anton explained as they drove through barren countryside. "But the north isn't exactly safe. Random shelling, checkpoints run by whoever has the most guns that week. Desperate people doing desperate things. Are you sure about this?" Thomas nodded, watching the unfamiliar landscape pass by his window. "I've spent 5 years wondering if my sister was dead or alive. Now I know she's alive, but I still don't understand why she chose this. I need to hear it from her." Anton stopped the Jeep at a small village 10 miles from the border. "This is as far as I go today. We'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, maybe we get a message back." That evening, in a small room above the village's only cafe, Anton took Thomas's evidence, the photos, the DNA test, and disappeared for 3 hours. When he returned, his expression was unreadable. "Someone will come for you tomorrow at dawn," he said. "Just you, not me. They'll take you to a meeting point. That's all I know." Thomas barely slept. At first light, a teenage boy appeared at the door, gesturing for Thomas to follow. They walked through the quiet village to where an old truck waited, its engine running. The driver, a weathered man in his 60s, said nothing as Thomas climbed in. They drove for hours, taking dirt roads that didn't appear on any map Thomas had studied. Eventually, they reached a clearing where a faded blue tent stood alone. The driver pointed, then turned the truck around and departed without a word. Thomas approached the tent, his heart pounding. Before he could call out, the flap opened, and there she was, thinner than he remembered. Her dark hair cut short, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. But unmistakably Eliza. "Thomas," she said, her voice exactly as he remembered it. "You shouldn't have come." But her eyes filled with tears as she stepped forward to embrace the brother she had left behind. They sat across from each other in the small tent, a gas lantern casting long shadows on the canvas walls. Thomas couldn't stop staring at his sister, cataloging the changes 5 years had wrought. Her face was leaner, weathered by sun and hardship. A thin scar ran along her jawline. Her hands, once soft and manicured for hospital work, were now calloused and strong. But her eyes were the same, dark, intelligent, seeing everything. "You shouldn't have come," Eliza repeated, pouring tea from a battered thermos into 2 chipped cups. "It's not safe. Not safe." Thomas's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "You've been letting us think you were dead for 5 years. Mom and Dad, do you have any idea what this has done to them?" Pain flashed across Eliza's face. "I can imagine," she said quietly. "And I'm sorry for that. But I had no choice." "There's always a choice," Thomas countered. "You could have told us the truth." Eliza shook her head. "Not this time." She pushed a cup of tea toward him. "How did you find me?" Thomas pulled out his phone and showed her the email with the photo. "Someone sent this." "Who would have done that?" She studied the image, frowning. "Probably Anton. He's been documenting our work, though we've asked him not to include our faces." She sighed. "He knows my story. Maybe he thought it was time." "Time for what?" "Time for me to reconnect with my past. Or time for you to know I'm okay." She set the phone down. "Though I'm not sure he did you a favor bringing you into this." "Into what exactly?" Thomas gestured around them. "What is all this, Eliza? What are you doing here?" She took a sip of tea, gathering her thoughts. "I'm part of a network called the Ghost Medics. We provide care in conflict zones where traditional aid organizations can't or won't go. Places too dangerous, too politically complicated, or too forgotten by the world. But why the secrecy? Why disappear? Because what we do exists in a gray area of international law," Eliza explained. "We cross borders illegally. We operate without permits. We treat everyone, civilians, soldiers from all sides, even people labeled as terrorists by some governments. Our neutrality is our protection, but it's also what makes us targets." She set her cup down and leaned forward. "Remember that family I wrote about in my journal? The refugees who died? After that, I started looking into why the medicines they needed never arrived. I tracked supply chains, donation records, distribution reports. What I found was ugly." "What do you mean?" "Corruption. Aid supplies being diverted, sold on black markets. Officials taking bribes to delay shipments. In some cases, deliberate blockades to punish certain populations." Her voice hardened. "I gathered evidence, documented everything. I was going to expose it all, naively thinking that would change things." "And that's why you had to disappear?" Thomas asked. "Because you were threatening to expose corruption?" Eliza nodded. 3 weeks before I disappeared, I received my first warning. A photo of our parents' house in Arizona with a clear message: "Stop looking or they die first." A week later, photos of you. Photos of your house, your workplace. Then my colleagues at the hospital. Thomas felt cold despite the warmth of the tent. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "These weren't local criminals, Thomas. These were people with connections to governments, to global organizations. People with long reach." She rubbed her eyes. "I did try to report it anonymously. The officer I contacted was found dead 2 days later. Suicide, they called it." Thomas remembered the news story. An officer from a neighboring precinct had been found in his car, gun in hand. It had barely made the local paper. "That's when I knew I had 2 choices," Eliza continued. "Stop my investigation and live with knowing I was letting people get away with what amounted to murder for profit, or disappear and continue the work from outside the system." "So you faked your own disappearance," Thomas said. "Made it look like you might have been abducted or killed. It was the only way to protect everyone I loved. If they thought I was dead or missing, there would be no reason to harm you all." Her eyes filled with tears. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done, knowing what it would do to you, to Mom and Dad, but I couldn't see another way." Thomas tried to process everything she was telling him. "Where did you go first?" "Underground, through networks I'd established during my research. People who helped me get false papers, new identities. I spent 6 months in Eastern Europe, training with field doctors who'd worked in combat zones. then Middle East, Africa, wherever the need was greatest and the official response was weakest. She gestured toward a worn medical bag in the corner. I've treated bullet wounds in living rooms, delivered babies in cellars during air raids, performed surgeries on kitchen tables by flashlight. We go where no one else will go, treat people everyone else has abandoned. Thomas stared at his sister, trying to reconcile the nurse he had known with this hardened field doctor, living on the edges of the world's worst conflicts. And Karyev, how did you end up here? It's where I'm needed most right now. The official aid groups pulled out 2 years ago when 3 of their doctors were killed at a checkpoint. But there are still 500,000 civilians trapped here, caught between warring factions. Her eyes took on a distant look. Children with treatable infections dying because basic antibiotics can't get through. Pregnant women with no access to prenatal care. Elders with chronic conditions left to suffer. The same things that drove you away in the first place, Thomas observed. Eliza nodded. But here I can help directly. No bureaucracy, no politics, just immediate care for whoever needs it. At what cost, though? Thomas asked. Your identity, your family, your safety? A cost I've made peace with, she said simply. Or I had, until you showed up. They fell silent for a moment, the weight of their reunion hanging heavy between them. How are Mom and Dad? Eliza finally asked, her voice smaller, more vulnerable than before. Thomas told her about their parents' grief, how their father's health had declined after her disappearance, how their mother had joined support groups for families of missing persons. He showed her pictures of his wife, his daughter named for her. She has your smile, Eliza said softly, tracing the child's face on the screen with her fingertip. I'm an aunt. You could come home, Thomas suggested, hope rising in his chest. See them all. Meet your niece. Eliza's expression shuddered. No, I can't. The people who threatened you, it's been 5 years. Surely, time doesn't matter to people like that, and the work I was investigating continues. She shook her head firmly. More importantly, I can't leave my patients. There are only 4 of us providing medical care for this entire region now. If I leave, people die. Thomas felt anger rising again. So you're choosing strangers over your family? I'm choosing to save lives where no one else will, Eliza countered. Can you understand that? Even a little? Before Thomas could answer, a rapid series of knocks sounded on the tent pole. Eliza immediately tensed, reaching for her medical bag. A young woman poked her head through the flap, speaking rapidly in a language Thomas didn't understand. Eliza responded in the same tongue, her movements becoming quick and efficient as she packed supplies into her bag. What's happening? Thomas asked. Shelling in a village 10 kilometers east. Casualties coming into our main clinic. She pulled on a worn jacket. I have to go. I'll come with you, Thomas said, standing. Eliza paused, studying him. It's not safe. Neither is letting you disappear again. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Stay close to me. Do exactly as I say. If I tell you to get down, you get down. If I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Thomas nodded, and they ducked out of the tent into the fading daylight. A battered pickup truck waited outside, its bed already half full of medical supplies. The young woman who had brought the news was behind the wheel, engine running. As they climbed in, Thomas saw something in his sister he hadn't noticed before, a calm certainty, a purpose that seemed to straighten her spine and sharpen her focus. Whatever doubts she might have about her choices, they vanished the moment she was needed. The truck lurched forward onto a rutted dirt road, heading toward distant columns of smoke rising on the horizon. Eliza checked her supplies methodically, explaining to Thomas what each item was for, what he could do to help if needed. Most injuries will be from shrapnel, blast trauma, maybe some crush injuries if buildings collapsed. We'll triage at the scene. Red tags for immediate life-threatening injuries, yellow for serious but stable, green for walking wounded. Thomas listened, trying to absorb it all, watching his sister transform before his eyes from the woman who had cried over family photos to a combat doctor preparing for battle. Eliza, he said as the truck bounced over the rough terrain, when this is over, we need to figure something out. I can't just go home and pretend I never found you. She glanced at him, her expression softening briefly. We'll talk after. I promise, but right now I need you to understand. This is what I do now. This is who I am. As the truck crested a hill, the full devastation came into view. A small village with several buildings reduced to rubble, people digging frantically through debris, others carrying the injured toward a makeshift clinic set up in what appeared to be a former school. Eliza took a deep breath, her face settling into lines of determination. "Welcome to my world, brother," she said, and jumped from the truck before it had fully stopped, running toward the first wounded person she saw. Thomas watched for just a moment, seeing his sister, the girl who had once cried over dead houseplants, who had been afraid of thunderstorms well into her teens, kneel beside a bloodied man with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done and how to do it. Then he followed her into chaos, understanding for the first time that the sister he had lost and the woman he had found were two entirely different people. The old school building had been converted into a makeshift hospital, its classrooms now serving as treatment areas. The main hall functioned as a triage center, where the injured were sorted based on the severity of their conditions. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the sharp bite of antiseptic. Thomas followed Eliza through the crowded hall, trying to stay close without getting in her way. She moved with practiced efficiency, assessing patients with quick, gentle touches and calm questions in the local language. "Can you hold this?" Eliza handed Thomas a clipboard. "Write down what I tell you." For the next hour, Thomas became his sister's assistant, documenting injuries and treatments as she worked her way through the wounded. His stomach churned at the sight of open wounds and broken bodies, but he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. "Male, approximately 50 years old, shrapnel wounds to right leg and abdomen," Eliza dictated as she examined an unconscious man, starting IV fluids, administering 5 milligrams morphine, prepping for surgery. She looked up at Thomas. "Got it?" He nodded, writing quickly. This clinical Eliza was so different from the sister he remembered, the one who had cried during sad movies and squeezed his hand at scary parts. This Eliza's hands were steady even as she stitched a gaping wound on a child's forehead, her voice soothing as she explained to the frightened boy what she was doing. "You're good at this," Thomas said during a brief lull. "I mean, I knew you were a good nurse before, but this is different." Eliza wiped sweat from her brow with her forearm. "Out here, you learn fast or people die. We don't have the luxury of specialists and consultations." She checked her watch. "The surgeries will start soon. Do you want to help, or would you rather wait outside?" Thomas thought about the comfort of his life back home. His clean office job, his quiet suburban neighborhood where the worst emergency was usually a power outage after a storm. Then he looked around at the volunteers working tirelessly amid conditions he could barely comprehend. "I'll help," he said. "Tell me what to do." Eliza's face softened with something like pride. "We need to prep the classroom that's serving as an OR. Come on." The operating room was a former science classroom. The teacher's desk served as an operating table, with bright construction lights rigged above it. A generator hummed outside the window, powering the few pieces of modern medical equipment they had. Thomas helped Eliza and another doctor, a gray-haired man introduced simply as Dr. Pavel, prepare for surgery. He held equipment, passed instruments, and tried not to flinch at the procedures performed without the high-tech support he assumed was standard in modern medicine. "How do you do this without proper facilities?" he asked during a break between patients. "We adapt," Dr. Pavel said in accented English. "Medicine was practiced long before fancy machines. Most important tools are here and here." He tapped his head and then his heart. Eliza nodded. "We focus on what we can do, not what we can't. Sometimes that means making tough choices." As if to illustrate her point, a young volunteer rushed in, speaking rapidly. Eliza and Dr. Pavel exchanged a look before following the volunteer to a corner of the main hall, where a woman lay unconscious, blood soaking through bandages on her chest. Thomas watched as they examined her, their expressions growing grave. They spoke in hushed tones, occasionally shaking their heads. Finally, Eliza stepped back, her face tight with frustration. "What's wrong?" Thomas asked when she approached him. "Shrapnel pierced her lung and probably her heart. She needs thoracic surgery we can't provide here. Equipment we don't have." Eliza ran a hand through her hair. "The nearest facility that could help is across the border, 4 hours away. So we'll take her there," Thomas suggested. Eliza shook her head. "The roads are too dangerous right now. There's active fighting between here and the border, and even if we could get through, the border crossing is closed to locals. She doesn't have papers. So what happens? We make her comfortable. That's all we can do. Thomas stared at his sister in disbelief. You're just giving up? There has to be something. This is the reality of where we work. Eliza cut him off, her voice low but intense. Every day we face situations where we can't save everyone. We focus on those we can help. Before Thomas could respond, shouting erupted near the entrance. A group of armed men had entered the building, their weapons held loosely but visibly. The room grew quiet, patients and staff alike watching warily. Eliza straightened, her face carefully neutral. She approached the men and spoke to them in their language. Thomas couldn't understand the words, but he could read the tension in his sister's shoulders, the deliberate calm of her gestures. After what felt like an eternity, the men nodded and left. The entire room seemed to exhale. What was that about? Thomas asked when Eliza returned. Local militia. They wanted to make sure we weren't treating fighters from the opposing side. She sighed. It happens regularly. Sometimes both sides visit on the same day, each demanding we turn away the other's wounded. And do you? Turn people away based on which side they're fighting for? Never, Eliza said firmly. We treat everyone. It's the only way we can operate here. Complete neutrality. We don't ask which side someone's on. Don't get involved in politics. We just treat the wounded, whoever they are. Isn't that dangerous? Everything here is dangerous. But maintaining our neutrality is what keeps us alive. She checked her watch again. Let's get back to work. There are still patients waiting. They worked through the night, catching moments of rest when they could. Thomas found himself doing things he never imagined, holding pressure on bleeding wounds, comforting a crying child while Eliza set his broken arm, even helping to deliver a baby whose mother had gone into labor from the stress of the attack. By dawn, the initial rush had subsided. The most critical patients had been treated, the dead respectfully covered and moved to a separate room. Eliza led Thomas to a small office where cots had been set up for the medical staff. She collapsed onto one, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. This is what you do every day? Thomas asked, sitting on the cot opposite her. Not every day is this intense, but yes, this is my life now. She looked at him through half-closed eyes. Do you understand better now? Why I can't leave? Thomas thought about the woman with the chest wound, who had died during the night despite their efforts. He thought about the child whose arm Eliza had set, who had smiled through his tears when she gave him a piece of candy afterward. He thought about the baby, born amid destruction but healthy and whole thanks to Eliza's skilled hands. I'm starting to, he admitted, but I still don't accept that cutting yourself off from your family was the only option. Eliza sighed. It wasn't just about the threats, though those were real. It was also about commitment. The people we help here need to know they can count on us to stay, not to run away when things get hard. She sat up, facing him directly, and I needed a clean break, to become someone new. You could have trusted us with the truth. Maybe. She looked down at her hands, still stained with dried blood despite multiple scrubbing. But every connection to my old life was a potential vulnerability, for me and for you. The people I was investigating, they don't play by normal rules. These people, who are they exactly? Eliza hesitated. It's complicated. Government officials in several countries, executives at certain aid organizations and pharmaceutical companies, people who profit from controlling who gets help and when. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. Everything I've gathered is here. Financial records, emails, shipping manifests that don't match donation reports. Enough to expose the whole network. Why haven't you released it? Because as soon as I do, my usefulness as a threat ends. Right now, they leave me alone because they know I've arranged for this information to be released if anything happens to me. She tucked the drive away. It's my insurance policy. It keeps me alive and able to work. Thomas tried to process everything. So you live as a ghost, always looking over your shoulder while these people continue their operations? For now, until I find a better solution. Eliza's expression hardened. Or until someone finds a way to expose them that doesn't result in more innocent people dying. They fell silent, the weight of her words hanging between them. Outside, the sky lightened to a pale blue as sunrise approached. Distant explosions occasionally punctuated the quiet, the war continuing despite the exhaustion of those caught in it. I need to get you back to the border crossing, Eliza finally said. It's not safe for you to stay longer. I'm not leaving yet, Thomas insisted. I just found you. And now you know I'm alive. That has to be enough. Her voice softened. Think of your wife, your daughter. They need you to go home safely. And what about our parents? Do I tell them you're alive but chosen to stay away? Or do I continue the lie that you might be dead? The question hung in the air between them, unanswered as a commotion outside drew their attention. Dr. Pavel appeared in the doorway, his face grim. We need to move, he said urgently. Military convoy approaching from the east. Could be government forces or rebels, either way not good for us. Eliza was on her feet instantly, fatigue forgotten. Start loading the critical patients. We'll take them to the fallback location. She turned to Thomas. This is why you need to leave. Now. As they rushed to prepare for evacuation, Thomas watched his sister direct the operation with calm authority. Patients were transferred to vehicles, essential supplies packed, records secured. Everyone moved with practiced coordination, clearly having done this before. Thomas helped where he could, carrying supplies and assisting with patient transfers. As the last vehicle was being loaded, he made his decision. I'm coming with you, he told Eliza as she did a final check of the nearly empty building. Thomas, just to your fallback location, he clarified. Then we'll figure out next steps. But I'm not leaving you yet, not like this. Eliza studied his face, seeing the determination there. Finally, she nodded. Stay close to me. And remember what I told you before. If I say run, you run. They climbed into the back of a truck filled with medical supplies and 2 stabilized patients. As the small convoy pulled away from the school, Thomas looked back to see a line of military vehicles approaching from the opposite direction. What happens now? He asked. Now, Eliza said, securing a tarp over their supplies. You see how the ghost medics really operate. The convoy of battered vehicles wound through narrow back roads, avoiding the main highways where checkpoints would slow them down or stop them entirely. Thomas held onto a metal support bar as their truck bounced over the rough terrain, occasionally checking on the 2 patients lying on stretchers beside him. How much farther? He asked Eliza, who was monitoring an elderly man's IV drip. About an hour, if we don't run into trouble. She adjusted the flow rate on the IV. The fallback location is an abandoned factory near the northern border. We've set it up as a secondary clinic for situations like this. Thomas watched the unfamiliar landscape pass by, rolling hills scarred by mortar craters, abandoned farms with bullet-riddled walls, the occasional burnt-out vehicle pushed to the roadside. Evidence of war was everywhere, yet between these signs of destruction, life continued. He spotted children playing in a village they passed through, women hanging laundry, an old man tending goats as if nothing was wrong. How do people live like this? He wondered aloud. With war all around them? They adapt, Eliza said. Humans are remarkably good at finding normal in the middle of chaos. They have to be. She checked her patient's pulse. Most people here can't leave, even if they wanted to. No money, no papers, nowhere to go. So they endure. The truck slowed as they approached a river. The bridge ahead had been partially destroyed, with only a narrow section remaining intact. This is always the tricky part, Eliza explained, as their driver carefully maneuvered onto the damaged bridge. We have to cross one vehicle at a time. Too much weight could bring the whole thing down. Thomas held his breath as they inched across, the sound of rushing water below, mixing with the strain of the engine. Once safely across, they waited as the rest of their small convoy followed. You do this regularly? Thomas asked. These evacuations? More often than we'd like, Eliza admitted. The front lines shift constantly. One day an area is relatively safe, the next it's in the crossfire. We've gotten good at packing up and moving quickly. As the last vehicle made it across, they continued their journey. Eliza pointed out landmarks along the way, explaining the complex political situation that had led to this seemingly endless conflict. Thomas listened, trying to understand the world his sister had chosen to live in, so different from the peaceful suburb he called home. By late afternoon, they reached the abandoned factory. From the outside, it looked deserted. Windows boarded up, vegetation growing through cracks in the concrete. But inside, Thomas discovered a surprisingly well-organized medical facility. Solar panels provided limited electricity. Water was collected from rain and purified. Operating areas had been set up with equipment salvaged from damaged hospitals. Welcome to Ghost Base, Eliza said as she guided him through the space. Not exactly Pine Harbor Memorial, but it serves its purpose. The patients from their convoy were quickly settled into a ward area. Medical staff moved with quiet efficiency, resuming their work as if they hadn't just fled from potential danger. Thomas helped where he could, following Eliza's instructions and trying to stay out of the way of the more experienced volunteers. As evening approached, Eliza found him sitting outside on a concrete barrier, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful in a way he hadn't expected in a war zone. Hungry? She handed him a bowl of simple stew. It's not much, but it's hot. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the events of the past 24 hours settling between them. I have to leave tomorrow, Thomas finally said. My flight home is in 3 days.
I need to get back to the border crossing. Eliza nodded. I know.
Anton will arrange transport for you. And what about you? Thomas asked the question that had been weighing on him since their reunion. What happens now that I've found you? Eliza set her bowl aside, gathering her thoughts before answering. I can't come home, Thomas. My work here isn't finished. These people need me. People at home need you too. It's different. Back home, there are thousands of doctors and nurses. Here, we're sometimes the only medical care for hundreds of miles. She turned to face him directly. But finding you again has made me realize I don't want to be completely cut off from my family anymore. Hope flickered in Thomas's chest. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe there's a middle path. I can't come home, but I don't have to be a ghost anymore, at least not to you. She reached for her bag and pulled out a small metal box. Inside was a satellite phone. This is secure, untraceable. I've never used it because any connection to my old life seemed too dangerous. But now, she held the phone out to him. Take this. There's only one number programmed into it. You can call me once a month on the first Sunday, just to check in. Brief conversations. Only. Thomas took the phone, its weight in his hand oddly reassuring. And our parents? Eliza's expression turned pained. I don't know yet. It's too risky to tell them everything. But maybe you can tell them I'm alive, that I'm working somewhere remote, that I can't come home yet, but I'm okay. Half-truths, Thomas said. Better than believing I'm dead. Eliza looked out at the darkening landscape. Let me think about it more. For now, just you. We start with just you knowing. Thomas nodded, slipping the phone into his pocket. I still don't fully understand your choices, but I'm trying to. That's all I can ask. Eliza smiled, a genuine smile that reminded Thomas of his sister before all this began. Now tell me more about my niece. What's she like? They talked for hours as night fell completely, sharing stories from their separate lives. Thomas described his daughter's first steps, his wife's recent promotion, the new house they'd bought in a neighborhood near his old one. Eliza told him about patients she'd saved, places she'd worked, the close-knit family she'd formed with her fellow ghost medics. In the morning, a vehicle was waiting to take Thomas back toward the border. Eliza walked him to it, their goodbye hanging unspoken between them. I'll call, he promised, embracing her tightly. First Sunday of every month, I'll answer, she replied, holding on to him a moment longer. Be safe, Thomas. You're telling me to be safe? He laughed, gesturing at their surroundings. That's rich. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Give my love to your family. And tell Mom and Dad. Tell them I think of them every day. Thomas nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He climbed into the waiting vehicle, watching through the back window as his sister's figure grew smaller with distance. She stood perfectly still, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the repurposed factory that now served as her hospital, her home, her world. The journey back felt surreal. Within hours, Thomas was crossing the border legally with his proper passport. By evening, he was in a hotel with hot running water and electricity that never flickered. The next day, he boarded a plane that would begin his journey home, the satellite phone safely hidden in his luggage. 2 weeks after returning to Pine Harbor, Thomas sat with his parents in their sunlit Arizona living room. His mother poured tea from a delicate pot that had once been Eliza's favorite. His father adjusted the oxygen tube in his nostrils, his breathing more labored than it had been during Thomas's last visit. We have something to tell you, his wife said, squeezing his hand for support. Their daughter played on the floor nearby, oblivious to the weight of the moment. Thomas took a deep breath. It's about Eliza. He told them a version of the truth, that Eliza was alive working with an international medical group in remote areas. That she couldn't come home yet but wanted them to know she was safe. That she loved them and thought of them often. He didn't mention the dangers she faced daily, The targets on her back, the political complexities that kept her away. Those burdens were his to carry now. His mother wept, relief and renewed grief mingling in her tears. His father sat very still, absorbing the news with trembling hands. "She's really alive?" his mother kept asking. "Our girl is alive?" "Yes," Thomas assured her. "She's alive, and she's doing incredible work, saving lives in places where no one else will go." "That sounds like our Eliza," his father said, voice rough with emotion. "Always had to help the ones others forgot." 6 months later, an earthquake struck Karayev, drawing brief international attention to the war-torn region. For a few weeks, aid poured in, journalists filed reports, and the forgotten crisis became momentarily visible to the world. Thomas watched the news coverage obsessively, searching for glimpses of his sister. He found her in the background of a CNN report, a figure in a dusty blue headscarf kneeling beside injured children, her face partially obscured but unmistakable to him. The reporter referred to her only as one of the mysterious medical workers locals call the Angels of Karayev. That night, cradling his sleeping daughter, Thomas told her about her Aunt Eliza, the woman who had disappeared to help others, who had become a different kind of hero than anyone could have imagined. He promised himself that someday, when the world was safer and secrets could be revealed, he would take his daughter to meet this extraordinary woman. Until then, he had the satellite phone the first Sunday of each month, and the knowledge that his sister had found her purpose in the broken places of the world. It wasn't the happy ending he had once hoped for, but it was something true and meaningful, a connection maintained across impossible distances, a family separated but never truly broken, and somewhere in a conflict zone most people couldn't find on a map. Eliza continued her work, no longer entirely a ghost, carrying with her the small light of being known, of being remembered, of being loved despite everything.